Today I'm going to invite you to participate in communion. And I know it's easy for us to just go through the motions and to attend communion or to just kind of engage with it at a superficial level. But today I want to challenge you to participate in the communion service. This Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. It is the day that the church traditionally has begun the Lenten season. Historians disagree on when the tradition of Ash Wednesday began. If you have a Catholic background, most Catholics believe that the tradition of placing ashes on a person's forehead and having a service on the Wednesday at the beginning of the Lenten season began with Pope Gregory in about 550 AD, but no one's really sure when it began. For certain, it's existed for at least 1,000 years. People have been gathering together to remember and to have a worship service on Ash Wednesday. And I want to invite you to join us. For the last 5 years or so, we've been hosting an Ash Wednesday service, and we will do that this coming Wednesday at 7 in the morning, at noon, and at 6 at night. And it's a short service, and you have an opportunity to come and to reflect and to remember, to kind of square yourself away spiritually on Wednesday in our chapel. And so if you are a recovering Catholic or a rebellious Lutheran or a rogue Methodist or even a closet Anglican or Presbyterian or Episcopalian, you may be familiar with the liturgy of the Lenten season. Lent is technically or typically a 40-day time between the Ash Wednesday and the day of the Saturday before Palm Sunday. The Lent season goes for 40 days, and 40 is a significant number in the Bible. It signifies renewal, cleansing, sort of a new beginning. That's why the flood of Noah was 40 days and 40 nights. That's why the people of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. It's why Jesus prayed and fasted for 40 days. And so the tradition of Lent is a season of fasting, a season that is represented liturgically by forsaking something. Some of you will perhaps in your Lenten traditions forsake alcohol or tobacco or heaven forbid, the internet for 40 days. And it's a time of discipline. It traditionally began, and this is well documented, that the Lenten fasting season began at about 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. So both the Ash Wednesday tradition and the Lenten tradition are over 1,000 years old. The tradition of Mardi Gras in New Orleans, I think it hasn't really ever ended. We're not sure when it began, but you know that is, Fat Tuesday, which is the day before Ash Wednesday, and the Lenten season is supposed to be that time. That's technically 46 days before Easter to prepare a Christian's mind for the celebration of Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And we are going to do that here at Riverbend Church in these 40 days. It turns out to be 8 Sundays. Over these 8 Sundays, we're going to be preparing ourselves for the Easter celebration. And we're going to be doing that by studying the largest portion in our Bibles, that is the recorded teachings of Jesus. It is not the Sermon on the Mount. The largest portion of Jesus' recorded teachings is in the book of John. It takes place in what is called the Upper Room Discourse. And it's recorded for us in John chapters 13 through 17, 5 chapters of the book of John, of Jesus giving his disciples and us his final instructions. The Upper Room Discourse takes place at the Last Supper. The Last Supper and the First Communion and the Passover meal are all recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. The Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all record very precisely the establishment of the communion celebration and the betrayal of Judas and the future denial of Peter. But John goes on to give us a record of what Jesus told his disciples there in his final moments before he went out to the Garden of the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane and prepared for his crucifixion. And we are going to be studying the Upper Room Discourse, and we're going to be looking specifically at the paradoxes in Jesus' teaching. You see, our Christian faith is a paradox of paradoxes. Our faith is built on a paradox. It's built and it's littered with these contradictory, unprovable ideas, sort of the both ands theologically, the sovereignty of God, that God is omniscient and omnipotent and all-powerful, and the free will of human beings, that we are completely independent and autonomous, and we have the permission and the capacity to choose our own destiny. The paradox of Jesus is a deep paradox. How can he be 100% God and 100% man? In fact, Easter is the penultimate spiritual paradox. How is it that evil had to have its day so that good would triumph? What is the purpose and the meaning of the death of Christ in order to give us eternal life? And we are going to begin our study where the story begins, in John chapter 13, by looking at the first of 8 paradoxes. And the first paradox is the paradox of servant leadership. And we're going to look at the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. But before we do, would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your word spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to challenge us to enter into this moment with a heart of service. Pray that for myself and for my family, for everyone here and everyone who will be watching online. Pray that we might enter in to that heart of service today. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. It is called Goldbach's conjecture. Goldbach's conjecture is a mathematical paradox that was proposed in the mid-1700s, in 1742, by a Prussian mathematician named Christian Goldbach. And Christian Goldbach made this mathematical pronouncement where he said that every normal even number greater than 2 is the sum of 2 prime numbers. At the same time, there was a mathematician and a philosopher named René Descartes who made a corollary observation. And Descartes' corollary to Goldbach's conjecture is that every number, every even number, is expressed as the sum of no more than 3 prime numbers. Now, I can tell you a fact about both of those mathematical paradoxes. If you are here today and you heard those paradoxes and you got giddy with excitement, you started to think in your head, let me start adding up prime numbers to see if Goldbach's conjecture is true. Let me see the sum of 3 prime numbers, and any number cannot be more than the sum of 3 prime numbers. I got to get a pad and paper. I got to start doing this. You are one of those people who calms themselves down by doing Sudoku puzzles. You are one of those people who gets weepy. And not because you don't understand it, but because of the brilliance of a spreadsheet or piles of mathematical data. I can tell you for a fact that if you are one of those people, you are a nerd. And so Goldbach's conjecture and Descartes' corollary get you excited. But what does it mean to the rest of us? What it means to the rest of us is that we live in a world that is filled with paradoxes. And the paradoxes of Goldbach's conjecture is that we know it is true, but we cannot prove it. Goldbach's conjecture has been run out on supercomputers to 10 to the 18th power. And they realized they could run it to 10 with a million zeros after it, and they could not find an exception to Goldbach's conjecture. But that doesn't mean there isn't one. We just can't disprove it. And we live in a universe where the paradox is there are things that we know to be true, but we cannot prove them. This is the nature of our Christian faith. Our Christian faith is a faith that is built on paradoxes that we cannot disprove, but we cannot prove either, but we know are true. In the upper room discourse, as Jesus gathered his disciples together in John chapter 13, he enters into an activity, the washing of his disciples' feet. In John chapter 13, verse 1, it tells us that the Passover was drawing near. And what that meant for Jesus was he knew the clock was ticking. He knew that his destiny in just less than 24 or around 24 hours would put him on the cross, dying a brutal, painful death. He knew that his time was limited, and yet John tells us in John 13:1 that everything he did was motivated by love. That he loved his disciples and he loved them to the very end. He also knew that one of his disciples, Judas, had betrayed him. And he knew that God had given him power. It says there in John 13 that God had granted him the power. And it's an interesting observation because you realize in that moment Jesus had a choice. Jesus was fully God after all, and he had the opportunity, staring death in the face, knowing with 100% certainty what was ahead for him as a human being. And he could have said, no, not going to do it. I choose another path. I choose to wipe out the population of the earth with a word and start over. Just like in the flood, we're going to have a new beginning. I am done with these people. I am done with the thing that the human race has created, and I will start over. But John tells us no. He knew he had come from the Father, and he would return to the Father. And he decided in that moment, I will fulfill my mission. And I will return to the Father. And I will complete the redemption of this human race. And it says then that Jesus removed his outer garment. You realize that that's the only thing we know that Jesus ever owned, was one piece of clothing. In fact, it was a piece of clothing that the soldiers would argue over at the crucifixion. It was the only thing he possessed. And he says he removed that and wrapped a towel around his waist and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with a towel. Now, if you were hosting a dinner party and the host of the dinner party started washing the people's feet, you would say, okay, this is the weirdest thing that I have ever seen. It would be unbelievably awkward. But in Jesus' day, it wasn't awkward at all because they didn't have dining room tables. They didn't have dining rooms. They didn't have chairs. For the most part, people had cushions on which you slept and a mat on which cushions on which you sat and a mat on which you slept. They didn't have a lot of furniture. They were lucky to have a roof over their head. And so it's most likely that this Passover meal was served perhaps on blankets on the floor or perhaps on an elevated platform, 6 or 8 inches tall, surrounded by cushions, pillows, on which people would sit. They would bend their legs and sit and then reach in and eat the Passover meal right in front of them. But you can imagine what was going on when people came in from the streets. You have to remember hygiene 2,000 years ago was not as complicated as it is today. You took a shower when you went out in the rain. You took a bath when you fell into a lake or a river. They didn't have bathtubs. They didn't have showers in their homes. You might go years without any formal kind of bathing. And most people walked around in bare feet on the dirt streets. They didn't have paved roads. They had stone roads in some of the Roman Empire, but most of where they walked was on paths or on dirt roads that were filled with, how shall I say it, garbage, sewage, waste, droppings. You get the picture? And you're walking around in that, and you come in, and then you sit at a table with your feet just a foot away from your food. How unpleasant is that? So the least that the host could do is offer to wash the feet of his guests. And this was what was going on. This was hospitality. This was politeness. This is what people did. But John tells us, I think it's down like in verse 6, that Simon Peter objected. I don't know how many of the disciples' feet he had washed when he came to Peter, and Peter goes, whoa, hold on, time out. You are going to wash my feet? I don't think so. And Jesus said, oh, Peter, I know you don't understand now, but you will. You'll understand. And Peter went, I don't care. No, you're not washing my feet. And Jesus said, well, let me tell you this. Unless I wash you, and he's speaking metaphorically, spiritually, unless I wash you, you have no part in me. To which Peter, in his histrionic, hyperbolic way, went, okay, wash my hands and my head, wash my whole body. I'm all in. Jesus completes washing the disciples' feet, and he puts on his tunic, and he tells them that when you have a bath, you're washed clean. He's speaking metaphorically. He's talking about a redemption. He's talking about the cleansing of salvation. And when you take a bath, your entire person is clean. And he says, but one of you, not so much. Because he knew of Judas' betrayal. And then he goes on to say, you know, if I am your teacher and your master, and you call me that, and you should, you're right. And then in verse 14, he says, if I, your Lord, your master and your teacher, are willing to wash your feet, shouldn't you do the same thing for each other? You see, I'm setting for you an example for you to do as I have done for you. And then he says, let me tell you the truth. Verily I say to you, listen to me carefully. A servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. But if I am doing this for you, he says, you should follow my example, and you will be blessed if you do it. What Jesus is giving us a master class in is a master class in leadership. But it's an unconventional, paradoxical kind of leadership. It is servant leadership. See, what Jesus is proposing, and the way I see it, it's an equation. And on the left side of the equation is that exemplary leaders, great leaders, lead by serving. Now, I've been a student of leadership for most of my adult life because I want to do it well. And so I have read books out the yin-yang. In my office, there have got to be 30 or 35 books just on leadership. I read Peter Drucker's book on the effective executive, and I read Patrick Lencioni's book on the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and I read Zig Ziglar's book, See You at the Top. I read Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I read Tom Peters' book about search for excellence. I recently read a book by a man named Simon Sinek, who's talking about leaders eat last. I like that book a lot. But the book that made the greatest impact on me was a book by a Stanford Business School professor named Jim Collins. In 1999-2000, Jim Collins commissioned a group of his graduate students to do a study of the largest, most successful corporations in the world. And he said, I want you to discern what it is that makes them successful, and then I want you to do an aggregate on what do the most successful companies have in common. And I want us to look for the top 10 performing cultures against the metric of financial prosperity and success and longevity. I want to find the top 10 corporations in the world, and then I want to say, what do they all have in common? The most successful, excellent companies in the world. Now, they got through with their study and they realized they couldn't narrow it to 10, they had 11. But Collins made a stunning conclusion, and he published it in October of 2001 in a book called Good to Great. And at the beginning of the book, Good to Great, Collins identifies one of the things that all of the most successful companies did was they had what he called level 5 leaders. In the book, they describe these different levels of leadership. The first level is the competent employee, the individual who is a contributor, who does a good job. The second level is a great team member. The third level is a competent manager, a person who manages people and teams well. The fourth level is the level that we often think of as an excellent boss, as an excellent builder of companies or a director of people. They are an effective leader. They get stuff done. But he said, of the top 11 companies in the world, the top 11 highest performing companies, the difference between good companies and great companies is they had a leadership culture which was modeled by their most senior leaders, their CEOs and their presidents, that he calls a level 5 leader. And he describes the level 5 leader not as a person who's not ambitious, not as a person without an ego, not as a person who's not driven, but as a person who has, above all else, personal humility. That they are willing to set aside their own goals for the greater goals of the corporation or the success of their teams. They make it not about themselves. You know what he discovered? He discovered servant leadership. Riverbend Church here today is filled with leaders. I know many of you. I know we have founders of companies, we have entrepreneurs, we have CEOs, we have vice presidents and managers, we have C-suite executives, we have doctors and lawyers and practitioners of highly skilled, highly specialized professions. We have doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs. We actually have those in our congregation. So if there's a group of people that I could be sharing with who understand leadership, it's you. And I believe that all of us, if we have not also been leaders ourselves, we have been led. All of us know what it means to work for someone, to have a boss or an employer or a leader. And common sense tells us that we would rather work for a person who is humble than a person who is a turd. I used the word turd in the chapel and a couple of pacemakers went off. And I said, you should hear the words in my head. Turd is the most polite word I could say. But you know what it is. Would you rather work for a person who is a jerk? Or a person who is thoughtful, or a person who is committed, a person who leads by example? Would you rather work for that kind of person? A person who is a servant first. I think we all go, that's not a paradox, that's common sense. Maybe I'm too close to it. I mean, in my line of work, it is mandated that my calling is to serve. And so I have always seen that there is a natural relationship between leading and serving. But if you have spent any time in the marketplace, if you have spent any time in the secular business world, you know that that is not always true. But what makes this a true paradox is not that exemplary leaders lead by serving. Exemplary leaders also serve by leading. What I mean by that is that leadership is not virtue signaling. Leadership is not, I'm the leader because I tell you I'm the leader. I'm not the leader because my name is at the top of the letterhead. I'm not a leader by appointment. I'm a leader by example. I lead not that you should do what I say, but you should do as I do. And the paradox of servant leadership is that sometimes leaders lead by serving, and sometimes leaders serve by leading. What does Jesus say? In John chapter 13, 2 times, he points out, he's saying, I'm doing this as an example for you. I'm showing you how you are to lead, how you are to be like me, how you are to be my disciples. You are to wash each other's feet. But how does that work? What does that mean? I've learned two things over my years of seeking to serve by leading. And the first one is I've learned that it's important for a servant leader to love the success of those that they lead. It is more important for the people who I work with to be successful than it is for me to be successful. I am successful when they are successful. I am the chief cheerleader for the people that I work with, for the church that I am a part of. I want to see you do better than me. Some of you know me and go, David, that's not that hard. But the reality is my joy is to see those who I am investing in do better than me. It's what John records. It's that interesting verse in John 13:1, where he says, Jesus did this out of love. He loved his disciples. By proxy, he loves us. And he loves us to the very end. He's motivated by love because I love to see you succeed. There is no greater example of this kind of leadership than parenting. What is the goal of parenting? For your children to prop you up the rest of your life? For your children to serve you and make you proud? Or is the goal of parenting for you to take your children and put them on your shoulders and say, I challenge you to be better than me. I challenge you to be smarter than me. I challenge you to be a better person than I am. I have laid the foundation. This is the groundwork that I am giving you as a parent. And what I am hoping for, what I will celebrate, is when you are more successful than I ever was. When you are more spiritual, when you are a better person than I could ever be. What parent doesn't want to see their children succeed? I taught 3 teenage girls how to drive. It was the closest thing I have ever come to losing my salvation. Now, I not only taught my 3 daughters to drive, I had this conviction growing up on the farm that they should learn how to drive manual transmission cars. Because, I am aware, I have seen the apocalyptic movies where the zombies have taken over the world, and you have survived, and you run from the burning building, and the only vehicle with which you can escape the zombies is an old dump truck with a manual transmission. And if I am going to save my children from the zombies, they have to know how to get into that truck and drive away. So it's a matter of life and death. But you know what's funny? I actually taught my wife to drive a manual transmission. You want to hang your marriage in the balance? Try and do that. Because the only car we could afford was a car with a manual transmission. She said, I don't know how to drive it. I said, baby, I can teach you. And I took her out to Town East Mall in Mesquite, Texas. And it was a Sunday. Remember the blue laws? The parking lot was empty. So we drove around, and she picked it up really quick. And she can drive away from the zombies. She can do it. Now, I managed to teach 2 of my daughters to drive a manual transmission car, but I gave up on one. I just said, baby, you're driving automatic the rest of your life, and the zombies are going to have their way with you. I'm sorry. It's just I got 2 out, but you're not going to get it. Why did I do that? Because I want them to be better than me. I celebrate it when my 2 daughters are great moms. I celebrate it when their marriages are good, when they're good friends, when they're successful in their careers. I celebrate them for the things that they do better than me. It's how I lead. It's how I serve by leading. I lead them with the example of being grateful and by being celebratory in their success. The way Jim Collins puts it, he says, effective level 5 leaders look out the window to give praise and in the mirror to take responsibility. So the first way that I serve I serve by leading is I celebrate the success of the people around me. I affirm that. I want to put you on my shoulders. The second way that I do it is through trust. In John 13, the thing that we remember, the story that we remember is Peter. Jesus is washing the disciples' feet, and Peter has a fit. He's like, you shall not wash my feet. I think it's down in verses 6, 7, 8, and 9. He says, you shall not wash my feet. And Jesus says, you don't know what's going on, but you will. And he says, I don't care. You're not going to wash my feet. And he says, well, if you are not cleansed by me, you're not cleansed at all. And Peter says, whoa, wash my whole body, my head, my hands, everything. I'm all in. You see, there's this idea that great leaders, exemplary leaders, entrust those that they lead to get things done. They let go. They say, okay, it's your turn. And the humility that it takes to say, I know you aren't going to do it as well as me the first time. I know I could step in and do it, and it would be better, and it would be faster. But I trust for you to learn. I trust for you to fail. I trust for you to develop because I trust you. It's what Jesus was representing in commissioning his disciples, in commissioning us. I remember the only time I've ever had my feet washed. I was speaking on a men's retreat, and there were a couple hundred men on this retreat, and I was teaching on John 13. I was teaching on the foot washing, and I called one of the men up, actually the pastor of the church who was hosting this retreat, and I called him up on stage, and I washed his feet, and I explained how, this was a demonstration of humility, and then we commissioned the whole room, and they went around and washed each other's feet. And I was the guest speaker. So I kind of withdrew off to the corner of the stage, and I watched all this going on. And I remember, it was 25 years ago. These two teenage boys came up on the stage. I said, what's going on, boys? We're here to wash your feet. And I went, whoa. I'm the speaker. I'm not taking my shoes off. You're not putting your grubby hands on my feet. And I realized in that moment a lesson I've never forgotten, that I needed to trust them. Because sometimes being served is leading by serving, by trusting someone else to do it better than you, someone else to do it instead of you, to do it your way instead of my way. See, that's the paradox. That's where the paradox is. The paradox is not simply that exemplary leaders are humble. It's that exemplary leaders are aggressively seeking to serve. And they're willing to lead by example. This is the paradox of it. The paradox of servant leadership is sometimes it's serving by leading, but the other side of the equation is sometimes it is leading by serving. It's a paradox. It's uncommon. I can't prove it, but I can't disprove it either. This is the nature of a paradox. It's the nature of our faith. Our Christian faith is built on a paradox. I can't prove to you that Jesus was God, but you can't prove to me that he wasn't. I can't prove to you that God is omniscient and knows everything, but you can't prove that he doesn't. And so we live in this paradoxical world. And frankly, the world that we live in, the universe that we live in, is a universe of paradox. I mean, if you go online, and I did this week, I Googled list of paradoxes. You'll get a list, it's hundreds. There's hundreds of them. There are literary paradoxes and biological paradoxes and mathematical paradoxes and natural paradoxes and physical paradoxes and paradoxes in physics. The paradoxes in quantum mechanics are mind-blowing. There are things that the math says are true that when we observe them, they're different. And in the observation of them, it changes them. We don't know how this works. It's a paradox. You've heard of the paradox of Schrodinger's cat? that the cat is both alive and dead until you open the box? Well, maybe you haven't heard the paradox of the buttered toast cat. Have you heard the buttered toast cat paradox? The buttered toast cat paradox is built on two axioms. The first axiom is that if you throw a cat off of the roof, it will always land on its feet. The second axiom is if you drop buttered toast, it will always fall butter side down. So the question is, if you tape a piece of buttered toast to a cat and throw it off the roof, which way will it fall? Both are true. It's called a syllogism or a somata. In the 13th century, there was a French philosopher. His name was Jean Buridan. And he wrote a book called Sophomata, and it's sophisms. It's these paradoxes in mathematics and in nature and in philosophy. And in Buridan's book, he has an illustration called Buridan's Bridge. And he imagines a bridge over a raging river, and it's guarded by Plato, the philosopher. And Socrates approaches Plato on the bridge, and Plato says to Socrates, "You can only cross this bridge if you tell me something that is provably true. Because if you don't, I will throw you into the raging river." So Socrates thinks for a moment, and he says, "You will throw me into the river." Think about it. Is it true? Well, if he throws him in the river, it's true. But if he doesn't throw him in the river and lets him pass, then it's also true. This is the nature of the world that we live in. A world of both and, a world of paradoxes, a world of contradictions. And the ultimate paradox is what we celebrate at Easter and what we celebrate today in communion. We celebrate the body and the blood and the hope of the resurrection of Christ through oyster crackers and grape juice.